Hello everybody, this is Giampietro with the Morningstar Packing Company, here with your February 2022 Tomato Bite Update. I'm joined today by Mark Delamater. Mark's a colleague in our Information Services Business Unit. He provides excellent insight and analysis on market information and trends. And is here to provide a little bit of that context today for our viewers. Give us some insights on what's happening with the market here in California. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
So we just received some new reports, the first being the CLFP Stock-on-Hand report as of December 2021. Yep. That was published January 11th. 2 weeks later, we got the National Agricultural Statistics Services report from the USDA. And both those reports combined give us a lot of data, some good data.
Yeah.
We need to translate that into information. And the information we're looking for is how is it impacting our supply and demand coming out of California? More specifically, what kind of clues does it tell us about inventory relative to those two factors?
If we take a look at the CLFP report, their estimates for 12/1 total inventories or total stocks on hand was about 8.3 million raw ton equivalents. I'll just say 8.3 million from now on, just to make things a little easier. And if you look at their estimates of movement, that would put the inventories on 12/1 at about 7.8 months of movement on hand. And that's an important number to look at rather than just absolute volumes. It's important to think about how much movement are the inventory stocks going to be able to cover. So if you subtract 6 months worth of movement from that, that'll get you to your June 1st, 2022 estimate, which would put us at about 1.8 months of stock on hand as of June 1. But that is really not a very useful story. If you look at the CLFP's estimates for bulk paste stocks on hand, that was at about 5.2 million tons. And based on their estimates of movement, that was about 6.3 months of stock on hand. So if we subtract 6 again, we get down to an estimate of about 0.3 months of stock on hand on June 1st. But that's June 1st. We're still about at least a month away from 2022 production. So if we subtract another month away, that would put us at a deficit of about 0.7 months of stock on hand, which equates to about 600,000 tons of bulk paste on a raw basis. So obviously, physical inventories can't actually go negative.
Right.
And the CLFP numbers are estimates, but historically they've been good estimates. So at this point, our estimate would be that bulk paste stocks going into the 2022 pack season are going to be right at zero.
So at that level of carryout, it's typically going to start influencing both the buying and selling behaviors of the customers and the suppliers, the paste suppliers, or the processing tomato suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll start to see some decisions being made on what markets to support and really information on how it'll affect pricing. We'll start to see that evolving and painting a new picture. So that level is typically going to start ringing some alarm bells. It should,
yes,
in theory and in reality. But there's a little bit of hope on the horizon. There's the 2022 pack coming up. So it should be coming right around July, like you indicated. So how does that translate when we look at the USDA Crop Intentions report for 2022? We look at 12.2 million tons. Do we think that's enough to rebuild the inventories? Or do we see that that's also going to provide a little bit more challenge for us?
Yeah, I mean, again, another good question, and everyone should be thinking about that. California production can really be broken apart into two components. One of it is bulk paste, and the other one is everything else. And historically, California has produced about 75% of the crop California produces goes into bulk paste. The balance goes into everything else. Historically, the other component has run between like 2.5 million tons and 3.1 million tons, and averages at about 2.8 million tons a year. So if you want a rough rule of thumb to estimate how much bulk paste California is going to produce, take the estimate for total California production, subtract 2.8 million tons from it, and that'll give you your estimate for what the bulk paste pack will be. So in our case, if we've got a 12.2 million ton total estimate, we subtract 2.8 million tons from that, that would say that right now our best guess is probably about 9.4 million tons of bulk paste being produced by California. Now, if we go to the movement side, over the last 5-6 years, consumption of bulk paste, U.S. domestic consumption of bulk paste, has been running right at about 7 million tons a year. Our exports going into the NAFTA region have been very consistent, running right around 1 million tons a year. And then exports going outside of NAFTA have been running right around 1.4 million tons a year. So if you add that all up, you get 9.4 million tons. So at our recent historical movement rates of 9.4 million tons of bulk paste against a projected 9.4 million tons of bulk paste production, it says basically we're at a net zero and we won't make any inroads into improving the inventory carryover position. So right now the expectations would be that from a bulk paste perspective, we'll be going into the 2023 crop year with the same very, very, very low inventory levels that we find ourselves going into the 2022 crop year.
Mm-hmm. So we really quickly established some context here for the market, for California and the world in general. We put our arms around what's going on. Now, the fun part would be to poke a little bit of holes in this information.
Yeah.
And take a look at specifically the USDA Crop Intentions Report. So we have quite a lot of data there from a historical standpoint.
Yep.
And we can also take a look at how much, on a probability basis in the historical context, we've met or exceeded or fallen behind the January estimates when we look at actual performance later on down the road.
Yeah.
So we tried to take a look at that probability. What do we see when we look at history, and how should we be taking that information? Past performance doesn't guarantee future results,
Right.
but it may help give us a little bit of clues on what's happening. So what's our take on that?
Yeah, and I think another really good question, and like you said, the past doesn't guarantee the future, but it can give you an idea of maybe some ranges of probable outcomes. Again, if we look back over the last 6 years, in only one of the last 6 years has California production exceeded the January intentions. And that was only by about 2%. In the other 5 years, California failed to meet intentions by anywhere from a 5% miss to as high as an 11% miss. And if we look at over that whole 6-year period, California has averaged about 94% of intentions. So, and again, never wise to just use averages, but as a thought experiment, if you said, well, what if California comes in at 94% of intentions in 2022? Well, with 94% of 12.2 million tons would put us at about 11.5 million tons. And then if we use our rule of thumb again, and we subtract 2.8 million tons from that, it gets us down to an estimated bulk paste production of about 8.7 million tons, which is about 700,000 tons short
Below.
of what the 9.4 million run rate has been. And so under that scenario, the only thing, with no stocks available to supplement production, the only option California is going to be facing will be to cut movement. And if you had to guess, if I had to bet, I would say any movement cuts will come from the exports going outside of the NAFTA region. And so we could be looking at cutting exports by about 700,000 tons, dropping exports from 1.4 million tons down to 700,000 tons, which is about a 50% reduction in our exports going outside of NAFTA. And that would equate to about an overall 7% reduction in the movement of bulk paste.
Which would really more or less put exports almost to an idle when you think of that kind of substantial reduction.
Right. And also obviously have an impact on markets outside of the United States, it's outside of NAFTA, as suppliers in other parts of the world look to try to cover the reduction in California exports.
There would be a compensating effect from other producing regions around the world.
Right.
So the optimist in me wants to think there's still time to close acres for 2022, but time's ticking, and obviously we're going to have to start making some planting decisions pretty soon.
Yes, very soon.
A big component of that 12.2 million ton crop, though, is the the settled price for raw tomatoes, which fortunately this year came in December, which helps provide quite a bit of visibility for both the grower and the customer on what to expect.
Right.
So from a customer standpoint, they look at the increase in price for raw tomatoes from $84.50 to $105 per short ton. The 24% increase has got the customer in the market asking, is that enough to add acres to processing tomatoes in California? That 24% should have been a really heavy foot on the accelerator to increase acreage.
Yeah.
But when we look at the report, it doesn't quite seem to have translated that way. So when we look at those price increases, what's really affecting us from moving the needle if it's not pricing? What are the components that are really kind of holding us back a bit on increasing the acreage?
Yeah, I mean, again, good questions, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the 12.2 million tons estimate for this year definitely is not significantly different than it's been for the past couple of years. So this huge increase in pricing did not really impact growers' desire to grow processing tomatoes. The only thing I can think of is looking at competing crops. The Pima cotton is at a 10-year high, and cotton has always been a historically competitive crop compared to processing tomatoes, especially in the south and the central part of the state. Cattle feed, silage crops have gone up in price and are looking maybe more competitive. And then there's also the drought situation in California.
Right.
Availability of water is extremely important to growers in all sections of the state, but especially important to growers in the central and southern part of the state where the majority of the processing tomatoes are grown. And with concerns about water availability, especially in Merced, Fresno, Kings County, that has a big impact on growers' willingness to commit to growing a processing tomato crop.
Right. So if there's a hyper-competitive environment there, the grower is going to look at maximum revenue per acre and try to decide what the best use of resources will be.
Yes.
So in that equation, there's the farm gate price, but that's obviously competing. So then we look at the probability of success, or what really adds the most value, what adds subsistence value to grow tomatoes for a California tomato grower. And I think by both opinion and analysis, we have the perspective that structurally tomatoes are quite a good competing crop.
Yes.
So what are some of those things that should be considered when trying to analyze the decision to grow tomatoes when there are other competing alternatives out there?
Yeah, I mean, again, a good question. And if you're taking a longer-term view, not just a single-year view, but if you're taking a longer-term view, a longer-term perspective, most of these other crops California can do well in, but California doesn't really have a really strong competitive advantage relative to either other producers within the country or on a global scale. So if cotton as an example, it can be a good crop in California, but California is a drop in the bucket compared to the global cotton market. Whereas with processing tomatoes, California is by far and away the dominant producer in the world and will stay that way for many years. So there's always going to be a strong market for California processing tomatoes, both domestically and globally. So I think from looking at the stability of the market, stability of volumes over time, it would be hard to find any crop that could possibly compete with processing tomatoes in California. And then you add to that the efforts that are being made by ourselves, Morningstar, as well as other players in the industry, to really work at improving the efficiencies at the ag side of the supply chain. Ourselves, we've been working on improving water usage for our growers, and not just with drip irrigation, but with modern precision farming techniques. In many cases, applying even things like artificial intelligence to help growers minimize the amount of water that they require for growing their crops, and thus both conserving water and reducing their costs. We've invested substantially in actually beginning to commercialize grafted tomato plants that have the potential to significantly increase yields for growers and also improve disease resistance. Basically a super tomato
Right.
that growers can now have access to, that should really help boost the economics for processing tomatoes as the years move forward. So those kinds of things, I think, all add to what the long-term potential for the processing tomato is, and I think those are the things that everyone should be focusing on.
Right, and to add scale and efficiency and really drive them home for all the players involved. Grafting being a fascinating mixture of both grower economics as well as sustaining a customer yield expectation for final product quality, and really putting a lot of power underneath a particular variety.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of comprehensive value, and we really like when things are really well-rounded like that.
Yeah, that is certainly one of the things that we're working on that can impact value across the entire supply chain.
Right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your insights, for joining us on this video.
Thank you for having me here.
Everything you had to offer, as always. We will be releasing some new pricing information to our website, and always check back regularly for the latest information. And if you have any further questions, we'd love to come visit you or have you come visit us, and we can elaborate further on these concepts and help you relate them back to your business and your purchasing decisions. Thank you very much.